Citizen Kane was released in 1941 and was directed by Orson Welles and also stars him and follows the story of a reporter who, in the wake of the death of Charles Foster Kane, a wealthy newspaper tycoon, is tasked with learning more about this man's life and also the meaning behind his final words, Rosebud. Guys, this has been a review that I've really put off for some time now, because how can you talk about what is considered to be the greatest film of all time? I mean, that's such a daunting task to me, but many people have done it so far on YouTube, and I'm going to be among that number. So this review is actually going to be a little bit different. I'm going to do the typical stuff that I usually do, talk about the movie, my thoughts on it, and then I'm going to talk about why I think or don't think that it is the greatest film of all time. So anyway, let's get started with what I think about the film. I absolutely adore this film. This is a film that I got introduced to, very early on, when I started to develop a love for film and wanted to learn more about film. I finally watched this film really early on in high school, and I'm not gonna lie, I found it really boring. In fact, I don't even think I finished it. However, through the years, I have been introduced to this film through film classes that I've taken and have watched it multiple times, and I can say that the more and more I watch this, the more and more I appreciate it and love what it's doing, from its storytelling to its cinematography to its editing to literally everything about it. This is just a stellar film, and I understand why so many people really gravitate towards this film and point to it as the greatest film of all time, because it is masterfully done from all aspects. Orson Welles really proved himself as a director with this film, this being his first film that he ever directed. For the longest time, Hollywood was trying to get him to make a film for them, and I think what makes this film work as well as it does is that he had complete and total freedom to do whatever he wanted with this film, and I think it shows in not just the storytelling, but just everything about it, from its shot compositions, which are completely stellar. This film really created, I think, the modern film in a lot of ways. There are just things that they implemented in this film that were used before previously, but not on this level of experimentation that has made this film so influential to so many people. And I'm talking a little too much about the history of the film, but let's get into the real meat of the story and the focus of the film, which is Charles Foster Kane himself. Orson Welles plays this character so incredibly well, seeing him from these humble roots and then eventually seeing this character that literally has everything lose everything in the end. It is a tragic story, and seeing his downfall is absolutely incredible, and Orson Welles really does such a great job of conveying this monstrous, powerful man, and then also you're able to kind of sympathize with him, especially in those final moments of his life, which I think are absolutely incredible from an acting and thematic standpoint. My favorite scene in the film has to be when Charles Foster Kane, his wife, leaves him, and he's just tearing the room apart inch by inch, and it's just so raw with emotion, and then he finally finds that snow globe of that house that looks so familiar to the house he grew up in, and all he can think of is Rosebud. It's such a beautiful moment. The shots, specifically the shot at the end of the film where he walks past a mirror and you see multiples of him, just the way it is shot. Every image informs us about the character and also tells a story. It's honestly one of the most beautiful looking films I've ever seen. The shadows, the way everything is framed from the high angles, the low angles, and the shot composition, such as this scene earlier on in the film where we see Charles Foster Kane in the background playing in the snow. His father and his mother are determining the life of their son. This is a scene that many people have broken down in many videos on YouTube explaining just how technically brilliant some of this stuff really is. And it is incredible. But also, I love how the story is told through a series of flashbacks by different people that knew Charles Foster Kane, and, they all have different ways of approaching him, and I was noticing this as I was watching it. I've noticed this before, but specifically when watching it this time, we never truly see the real Charles Foster Kane. We only see his memory through different people and how they thought of him. And so we're not seeing the real person, and that's really interesting to me. I don't know if that is something that was ever intended by filmmaker and screenwriter, but it is something that I think is really impactful, that we never see the real Charles Foster Kane. We only see his memory. And I think that's interesting as to how people thought about him, because we never really know who he truly was, only through the perspective of the people that know him. And so that's really a tragic story to me. And I also like at the very end of the film when the newspaper writer doesn't know what Rosebud means. This is something that he's constantly been trying to figure out through the entire film, and he doesn't figure it out. And ultimately, he comes to the conclusion that you can't really sum up a man's life in a single word. And that's just so interesting to me. That's something that's really interesting to think about and contemplate. I also want to commend this movie for the effects, specifically the makeup. This is incredible stuff. Orson Welles was 25 years old when he made this movie. He was the same age that I am now. And there are moments where he is not just playing a 20-something-year-old, but he's playing a 30-something-year-old, a 40-something-year-old, a 50-something-year-old. And the makeup is so incredible with how he is able to look so much older. It really holds up really well. Also, I like the fact that Orson Welles didn't really hire a lot of actors that were well known at the time. He hired people that he worked with on the stage. And I think it shows in the film that the film has staging similar to that of a play. It's not staging typical of a film, and so the language of the film is far different than something we've seen before. A lot of it feels very stagey and feels like it could be a play. And I really like that about the film. It gives it a completely different feel. I also love the Gothic architecture of Xanadu. I think there's just something so fascinating about seeing this monstrous-looking man, Charles Foster Kane, walking around this practically empty shell of a house. I also like how Orson Welles is able to tell us so much information without saying really anything. There's this moment throughout the film where Charles Foster Kane is talking to his wife and everything, and we see them together at this little table, and then we see him through, a montage of different scenes becoming a more bitter man, and we also see that the table makes these characters become farther and farther apart as they are becoming farther and farther apart in their marriage. I think it's just a really fascinating way of telling that story with no words. Now, I've been completely praising this film, and that is mostly due to the fact that I don't really have anything bad to say about the film. Everything that it does is just practically perfect to me, from the directing to the acting to the storytelling to just the characters and the cinematography, and all of that just brings it all together to make a extremely stellar film that is practically a perfect film. Now, obviously, there's people that are going to disagree with me. People that will find maybe this movie a tad boring, a tad self-indulgent, not as good as people say it is. And that is why I want to get into if this movie truly is the greatest film of all time or not. And it is completely up to the person watching the film. It's hard to determine what is the greatest film of all time because everybody has their own version of this. Everybody loves film differently, and it's a very subjective opinion, which film is ultimately subjective. People are going to love Citizen Kane, and people are not going to love Citizen Kane. The same as people are going to love The Godfather and not love The Godfather. These films are considered the greatest films of all time because a collective majority has determined it to be so. But that doesn't mean it's so. Now, it's considered the greatest film of all time. Why is that? Is it the storytelling? Is it that it's just that enjoyable of a film? To some, maybe so. But you have to look at it from the context of its influence, the period in which it came out, how it influenced cinema going forward. And that is where you'll get your answer. It's considered the greatest film of all time because it implements all these techniques to absolute perfection, and then through the years has garnered more and more respect from the film community. Because the people that are saying it is the greatest film of all time are filmmakers and film critics whose entire career is built upon studying film and figuring out how something is done and looking at the greater importance of it all. They are looking at it from the history of film. And in the history of film, Citizen Kane is one of the greatest films of all time. Even it might be the greatest film of all time because of its influence. You wouldn't have films such as 2001: A Space Odyssey, or The Godfather, or Star Wars without this film, because its influence is everywhere. People talk about this as being their favorite film of all time because it's what inspired them. Such as, films like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, or Alexander, or Zodiac are my favorite films of all time. They are what I consider the greatest films of all time because they are what influence me to make the films I want to make. And I think that is key into understanding why people think of Citizen Kane as the greatest film of all time. Now, do I think it is the greatest film of all time? Obviously, I don't. I don't think it is the greatest film of all time. But do I think it is one of the greatest films of all time? Absolutely. Its importance to film cannot be, forgotten. You can't ignore it because its influence is absolutely everywhere. It's a perfect film in what it sets out to do, and I think that's what people need to understand about it, to really understand why it is held up in this regard. And again, it's just an opinion. All film is an opinion. People have opinions that, The Godfather is the greatest film of all time, or Citizen Kane, or, some other film is the greatest film of all time. But I think we need to understand again, that it's all a subjective opinion. So that's my answer to that question, and why, people need to look at it not just from an entertainment level. Because, honestly, Citizen Kane isn't that entertaining of a film, to me personally. It's got some great stuff in it, but I'm not watching it with a bag of popcorn just eating it all up. When I watch it, I'm thinking of the acting, the cinematography, the use of the camera, the editing. I'm looking at all these things and how they combine together to create a very perfect film. So anyway, guys, with all that said, I'm going to give Citizen Kane a 9 out of 10. Well, guys, I want to thank you for watching this review. I hope you enjoy it, and I want to thank my buddy Soren, who recommended me talk about this film. I'm actually glad that I finally did, and I think I had something interesting to say about it that was a little bit different than what you might get. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next review.